What happens when a beloved country music icon walks onto a daytime talk show set expecting warm smiles and easy conversation about her latest tour, only to find herself walking straight into a political ambush she never saw coming? What happens when a host, known for sharp commentary and unapologetic opinions, pushes just a little too far, and discovers that the woman across from her is not the soft target she imagined? What you're about to witness is not just an interview. It's a collision. A slow-burning, tension-soaked, live television moment that would leave a studio audience frozen, co-host stunned into silence, and one of the most recognizable faces on daytime TV struggling to recover as the cameras kept rolling. This is part 1. The morning air inside the studio of The View felt unusually cool, the kind of manufactured chill that hums quietly through vents above the lights. Outside, New York City pulsed with its usual weekday rhythm. Inside, however, everything moved with controlled precision. Crew members adjusted cables. A production assistant whispered final cues. Makeup artists performed last-second touch-ups beneath the glare of white studio lights that flattened everything into glossy perfection. And then she arrived. Reba McEntire stepped through the side entrance with the calm composure of someone who had walked into hundreds of studios before. Her trademark red hair framed her face in soft waves, perfectly styled but never overdone. She wore a navy blazer tailored to command respect without screaming for attention. She didn't need to. Her presence carried its own gravity. She smiled at everyone. Not the forced celebrity smile, the real one. Warm. Familiar. The kind that had filled arenas for 4 decades. She was there to talk about music. A new tour. New songs. Stories from the road. The kind of conversation she'd had countless times. Comfortable territory. But there was something in the air that morning. Something she couldn't quite name. In the green room, a monitor played the show's live feed. The familiar theme music rolled during commercial break. Reba adjusted the small microphone clipped discreetly to her blazer. A producer leaned in. "We're so excited to have you," he said brightly. She nodded. "Happy to be here." And she meant it. Across the hall, at the table under the hot studio lights, Joy Behar shuffled her cue cards with a slight smirk that didn't quite reach her eyes. She had been in this chair long enough to know exactly how to steer a conversation. Long enough to know when to push. When to provoke. The floor manager's voice rang out sharply. "We're back in 30 seconds. Audience members straightened in their seats. The soft murmur of chatter dissolved into anticipation. Whoopi Goldberg leaned back in her chair, adjusting her glasses, her expression unreadable but observant. Reba walked onto the set to applause. It was genuine applause. Warm. Respectful. Some even stood. Joy greeted her with that signature half-smile, polite, but edged. They exchanged pleasantries. Laughed lightly about touring schedules. For a moment, it felt normal. The cameras captured easy smiles. The crowd relaxed. And then it shifted. "Reba," Joy began, her tone still sweet but her posture subtly leaning forward, "before we get to the music. I think our audience would love to know where you stand on some issues that really matter to working families across America." The words landed softly. But the temperature changed. Reba blinked once. Just once. A tiny flicker. "Well," she replied gently, "I'm really here to talk about the tour and the new album. It's been such a blessing connecting with fans." "Oh, come on," Joy interrupted lightly, though the interruption carried weight. "You've got influence. A huge platform. Surely you have opinions about what's happening in our country." A few audience members shifted in their seats. Reba kept her smile. Years in the spotlight had trained her face to remain composed even when the current beneath the surface turned rough. "My fans come from all walks of life," she said evenly. "They're teachers, farmers, military families, small business owners, but largely conservative," Joy pressed, tilting her head. Rural America. The same people voting against their own interests year after year. There it was. A ripple passed through the crowd. Not loud. Just noticeable. A tightening. Whoopi's eyebrow lifted almost imperceptibly. Reba's posture straightened. The warmth in her smile cooled a fraction. Joy, she said softly, I think you might be making assumptions about people you don't know. Her voice wasn't sharp. Not yet. Joy leaned in further, sensing friction. Country music has a history, she continued, of exclusion. Of lacking diversity. Of staying silent on social justice issues. Don't you think artists like you have a responsibility to speak up? The lighting suddenly felt harsher. The studio seemed smaller. Reba's fingers rested lightly around her coffee mug. She didn't lift it. She didn't need to. I've spent 40 years supporting causes quietly, she replied. Helping youth programs. Families. Communities. I don't always broadcast it. Joy smiled thinly. Convenient. A collective inhale rippled through the front rows. Reba's eyes changed. It was subtle. The warmth remained, but something firmer surfaced beneath it, something steel-like. Silence, Joy continued, especially during major movements, speaks volumes. The words hung there. The cameras zoomed slightly closer. Producers in the control room leaned forward. Reba leaned back in her chair slowly. Calmly. Like someone who had just realized the conversation she thought she was having, was not the one that was actually happening. Joy, she said carefully, you're confusing political stereotypes with real human beings. Her tone was still controlled. But the softness had faded. They're not stereotypes, Joy countered. They're voting records. Policy positions. Impact. And you think reducing people to voting patterns tells you who they are? Reba asked. The audience was completely silent now. Joy didn't answer immediately. She adjusted her cue cards. The air felt heavier. Reba glanced briefly toward Whoopi, who met her gaze with something that almost resembled a warning, or maybe concern. But Joy wasn't backing down. And your refusal to condemn those positions, she continued, makes you complicit. That word. Complicit. It landed like a dropped glass in a quiet room. Reba slowly set her coffee mug on the table. The soft clink echoed louder than it should have. Her shoulders squared. And for the first time that morning, the sweet country icon disappeared. In her place sat a woman who had built an empire through decades of grit, heartbreak, reinvention, and survival in one of the toughest industries in the world. Complicit, she repeated quietly. There was no anger in her voice. But there was something far more dangerous. The audience felt it. Joy opened her mouth to continue, but Reba lifted a hand, not aggressively, just firmly enough to pause the momentum. Joy, she said, let me ask you something. The entire studio leaned in without realizing it. When's the last time you visited one of these towns you're describing? A beat. When's the last time you sat at a kitchen table with families juggling 2 jobs, medical bills, and mortgage payments, and listened instead of lecturing? The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. Joy's smile flickered. I don't need to visit every small town to understand policy, she replied quickly. Reba nodded once. That's what worries me. A faint murmur spread through the crowd. The control room producers exchanged glances. This was no longer a routine segment. The lighting seemed hotter now. Beads of perspiration formed subtly along Joy's temple. And Reba, still calm, still seated, looked directly into the camera, not dramatically, not theatrically, but with the steady gaze of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. You think you're educating people, she continued, voice low and deliberate. But sometimes what feels like education, sounds a lot like dismissal. Joy shifted in her chair. Whoopi cleared her throat slightly, sensing the escalation. But something had changed. The energy in the room was no longer tilted in one direction. It was balanced. Charged. Volatile. Joy attempted to regain footing. Are you saying we shouldn't question public figures about important issues? I'm saying, Reba replied slowly, there's a difference between asking a question, and making an accusation disguised as one. The words landed clean. Precise. A camera operator adjusted his grip. Joy inhaled sharply. And for the briefest moment, just a flicker, uncertainty crossed her face. Reba leaned forward slightly now, elbows resting gently on the table. You assumed who my fans are, she said. You assumed what they believe. And you assumed I need to answer for them. The silence in the studio became almost electric. Outside the building, New York traffic roared as usual. Inside, the atmosphere felt like the seconds before a summer storm breaks, heavy, expectant, charged with something unstoppable. Joy opened her mouth again. But before she could speak, Reba added quietly, and you might want to be careful about underestimating the people you think you understand. The audience gasped softly. And that was the moment. The exact moment when everyone realized this wasn't just a tense exchange. It was about to become something far bigger. Because Joy wasn't done. And neither was Reba. What happened next would flip the energy of the room completely, and turn a routine morning segment into one of the most talked about showdowns in daytime television. But that is where part 1 ends. If you think this was intense, you haven't seen anything yet. Because in part 2, the gloves come off. And the entire studio shifts sides. The applause sign above the studio audience flickered faintly, though no one needed instruction anymore. No one was clapping. No one was whispering. The energy had shifted into something far heavier than polite television tension. It felt personal now. Charged. Unpredictable. Joy Behar straightened in her chair, smoothing the edge of her blazer as though composure could be physically pressed back into place. But there was a subtle tremor in her hand. Just enough to betray the pressure mounting beneath the surface. Reba McEntire didn't move. She sat still. Calm. Watching. The silence stretched just a beat too long. Joy inhaled sharply. Let's not pretend this is about me underestimating anyone, she said, her tone tightening. This is about accountability. When you have millions of followers, your voice matters. And staying neutral in times of moral crisis is neutral. Reba interrupted gently. Her voice wasn't loud. But it cut cleanly through the air. You think choosing not to shout my opinions from a rooftop is neutrality? The audience shifted again. A man in the third row leaned forward, elbows on his knees. A woman near the aisle pressed her lips together, eyes flicking between the two women like she was watching a tennis match where every volley carried consequences. Joy leaned in. When civil rights are on the line, when policies directly harm vulnerable communities, silence favors the status quo. There it was again. That wordless accusation layered beneath the sentence. Reba tilted her head slightly. Not defensive. Curious. Studying. And you've decided, she said slowly, that I'm silent because I don't echo your phrasing? Joy's jaw tightened. You're deflecting. No, Reba replied. I'm clarifying. The studio lights felt hotter now. One of the co-hosts shifted uncomfortably in her chair, glancing toward the producer's booth. Through the glass window high above the set, silhouettes moved quickly. Someone gestured sharply. Someone else shook their head. This was not in the rundown. Joy tapped her cue cards against the table. The soft papery snap sounded louder than it should have. Let's talk specifics then, she pressed. Your fan base overwhelmingly supports politicians who've rolled back reproductive rights. Who oppose climate initiatives. Who resist diversity reforms. You profit from that audience. So yes, people wonder where you stand. Reba's fingers laced together on the table. She didn't blink. You keep saying that audience, she said quietly. Like they're a separate species. A faint ripple of murmured agreement floated from somewhere in the middle rows. Joy shot a glance toward the crowd. That wasn't the reaction she was used to. I'm talking about data, Joy replied, her voice rising slightly. Voting trends. And I'm talking about human beings, Reba said. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Reba leaned forward just a little more now. Close enough that the camera zoom tightened almost instinctively. You're reducing millions of people to bullet points, she continued. Mothers. Veterans. Teachers. Farmers. Kids trying to figure out their lives. And you're labeling them backwards because they don't align with your worldview. Joy's nostrils flared. I never called them, you said they vote against their own interests, Reba cut in calmly. You said their values are backwards. The words hung there. Joy froze. The audience remembered. They'd heard it. And so had the cameras. Joy's mouth opened slightly, then closed again. She swallowed. I was speaking in a broader political sense, she said carefully. Reba gave a small nod. Then maybe broaden your understanding. A few scattered claps erupted before quickly dying down, unsure if applause was allowed in this new battlefield. Joy's composure cracked just slightly at the edges. You're turning this into a personal attack on me, she snapped. Reba's eyebrows lifted. You made it personal the moment you implied I'm complicit in harm, she replied evenly. The word complicit echoed again, heavier this time. Joy leaned back, folding her arms. A defensive posture now. Closed. Fine, she said sharply. Let's talk about influence. During the height of national protests, when artists across genres were speaking out, you were quiet. That silence sends a message. Reba exhaled slowly. Inside, something flickered, not anger, not quite. Disappointment. You assume I did nothing because I didn't perform it for cameras, she said. Joy shrugged thinly. Public figures make public statements. And sometimes, Reba said softly, public figures do private work. That line hit differently. The room absorbed it. Joy hesitated. Just for half a second. Then she pushed harder. But that's the problem, she insisted. Private gestures don't challenge systems. They don't move culture. Reba studied her. You believe shouting is the only form of courage? The question landed gently, but it carried weight. Joy's fingers tightened around her water glass. This isn't about shouting, she fired back. It's about moral clarity. And you believe you're the authority on that? Reba asked. Now the tension spiked. The other hosts sat frozen. One of them shifted as if to interject, then stopped. This was no longer something that could be casually redirected back to album promotion. This was real. Joy's cheeks flushed deeper. I believe some things are objectively right, she said firmly. Equality. Inclusion. Justice. Reba nodded. So do I. The simplicity of the answer disarmed the room. Joy blinked. Then why not say it clearly? Reba leaned back slowly, crossing one leg over the other. Relaxed. Controlled. I have, she said. For 40 years. In how I treat people. In who I hire. In what I fund. In the artists I support. But you don't see that because it doesn't fit your narrative. Joy's lips parted, but nothing came out immediately. Reba continued. You want me to declare allegiance to your phrasing, your framing, your tone. But real life isn't a hashtag. It's complicated. Nuanced. Messy. The audience was no longer neutral. There were nods now. Audible murmurs of agreement. Joy glanced toward Whoopi, searching for backup. Whoopi's expression was unreadable, thoughtful, but not intervening. Joy cleared her throat. So what you're saying is you refuse to take a stand? Reba's eyes sharpened. No, she said quietly. I'm saying I refuse to let you dictate what a stand looks like. A soft gasp. Joy shifted again, visibly rattled. You're twisting this, she said. Reba's voice lowered. No, Joy. I'm correcting it. Silence fell like a curtain. Somewhere in the back row, someone whispered, "Wow." Joy's composure was fraying now. She glanced briefly toward the cameras, aware, suddenly, of how this was unfolding in living rooms across the country. You know what? She said, voice tightening. It's easy to hide behind stories about small-town families and pretend politics doesn't matter. Reba's expression changed. Not anger. Resolve. Politics matters, she said firmly. But so does respect. Joy laughed shortly. It didn't sound amused. Respect goes both ways. Exactly, Reba replied. That word echoed. Exactly. Joy faltered. Reba leaned forward one final inch, her voice steady but now edged with something unmistakable. You invited me here to talk about music. You opened with an assumption. You framed my fans as harmful. You implied I lack moral courage. And now you're upset because I won't accept that framing. Joy's breathing had grown shallow. That's not what it is, Reba said quietly. The audience was fully leaning in now. Some faces tense. Some fascinated. A few visibly sympathetic toward Joy, but most watching with stunned attention. You've been in this chair a long time, Reba continued. You're used to steering conversations. You're used to guests scrambling to appease you. A subtle flicker crossed Joy's eyes. But you miscalculated today, Reba finished softly. That was the moment. The exact moment the balance of power shifted completely. Joy's lips parted, but no sound came. The cameras zoomed tighter. The control room was chaos now, whispered instructions, frantic gestures, but there was no clean exit. Because Reba wasn't done. She sat back slowly, folding her hands with quiet authority. And here's the part you're not ready for, she said. The audience held its breath. Joy swallowed. Reba's gaze locked onto hers. You think you're defending working families, she said softly. But you haven't listened to them in years. The words dropped like a stone into still water. And the ripple that followed was immediate. Joy's face drained slightly of color. The studio, once buzzing with casual daytime energy, now felt like the final act of a courtroom drama, the verdict seconds away. And that is where part 2 ends. Because in part 3, there will be no more restraint. No more polite corrections. Only the emotional climax that leaves one woman standing, and the other facing a silence she's never experienced before. If you thought the tension was high now, you haven't seen the ending. There are moments on live television when time seems to detach from reality. The lights still burn. The cameras still glide silently across their tracks. The red, on-air, sign still glows above the studio doors. But everything else slows. That was the moment they were in now. You think you're defending working families, Reba had just said, her voice calm but carrying an undeniable weight. But you haven't listened to them in years. The words hung in the air like smoke that refused to clear. Joy Behar didn't respond immediately. For the first time since the segment began, she looked unsure, not irritated, not sarcastic, not combative, unsure. The studio audience could feel it. It was subtle. A shift in posture. A slight downturn at the corners of her mouth. Her hands, once animated and expressive, now rested motionless against the table. The silence stretched. The cameras tightened. Reba didn't rush to fill the space. She let it sit. Let it breathe. Let the weight of it settle into the room. Finally, Joy inhaled, her voice lower than before. That's an unfair characterization. But the edge was gone. Reba tilted her head slightly. Not mocking. Not aggressive. Just steady. Is it? She asked quietly. There was no raised tone. No dramatic flair. Just a simple question, and that made it even harder to deflect. Joy shifted in her seat. She glanced toward Whoopi, toward the other co-hosts. None stepped in. None interrupted. They were watching too. Watching history unfold in real time. You're painting me as some out-of-touch villain, Joy said, trying to regain footing. I grew up working class. I know what struggle looks like. Reba nodded once. I believe you did, she said. That answer caught Joy off guard. But somewhere along the way, Reba continued gently, you stopped listening to people who didn't echo your perspective. A faint murmur moved through the audience again. Reba leaned forward slightly, resting her hands on the table, not in attack, but in sincerity. You've built a career on strong opinions, she said. And that takes courage. But courage isn't just speaking loudly. Sometimes it's sitting quietly and hearing something you don't agree with. Joy's jaw tightened. I do hear different opinions, she insisted. Reba's eyes softened, but they didn't waver. Then why does disagreement sound like moral failure to you? The question landed harder than any raised voice could have. Joy blinked. The room felt smaller now. The studio lights harsher. Even the faint hum of the air conditioning seemed amplified in the silence. I never said disagreement was moral failure, Joy replied, though the conviction was thinning. You implied it, Reba said calmly. When you called my fans backwards. When you suggested they vote against their own interests. When you labeled my silence as complicity. Joy opened her mouth, then stopped. Because she remembered. The words. The phrasing. The tone. They were all recorded. Broadcast. Undeniable. Reba continued, her voice steady and measured. You don't have to agree with them. You don't even have to like their politics. But dismissing them as ignorant or harmful without understanding their lived experiences, that's not accountability. A pause. That's arrogance. A collective inhale rippled through the studio. Joy's composure fractured visibly now. A flash of emotion crossed her face, anger, yes, but also something deeper. Embarrassment. She reached for her water glass again, her fingers trembling slightly. That's your opinion, she said quietly. Reba gave a small nod. It is, she agreed. And I'm allowed to have one. That line carried a quiet irony. The audience caught it. Somewhere in the second row, a man whispered, wow. Joy's eyes flickered toward the crowd. The energy had shifted entirely. She could feel it. The room wasn't with her anymore. Reba wasn't finished. You asked where I stand, she said softly. So let me tell you. She sat up straighter. I stand for treating people like human beings, even when I disagree with them. I stand for conversations that invite dialogue, not accusations. I stand for using influence to build bridges, not burn them. Her voice wasn't fiery. It was resolute. You believe the best way to move culture is confrontation, Reba continued. And sometimes confrontation has its place. But if every conversation starts with condemnation, nobody's listening anymore. Joy's shoulders sagged slightly. Reba's tone shifted then, not sharper, but warmer. Almost saddened. You could have asked me about the communities I support. The artists I mentor. The programs I fund. Instead, you assumed the worst. The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. You assumed I needed to defend myself, Reba added. And by extension, defend millions of people you've never met. Joy's lips parted. But this time, she didn't interrupt. Reba looked directly at her. I don't need you to agree with me, she said. And I don't expect you to. But respect isn't optional. Especially when someone is sitting at your table as a guest. That word lingered. Guest. It reframed everything. Joy swallowed. The reality of it, the optics, the imbalance, was settling in. Reba leaned back again, her voice softening further. You had an opportunity today, she said. To talk about music. About how art brings people together. Instead, you chose division. Joy's eyes glistened faintly now, not tears exactly, but the sting of realization. I wasn't trying to divide, she said quietly. I know, Reba replied gently. That answer stunned the room. Because there was no sarcasm in it. I don't think. You wake up wanting to hurt people, Reba continued. I think you believe you're doing good. Joy looked up at her then. And that's why this matters, Reba said. Because when we believe we're righteous, we stop questioning ourselves. The words settled heavily. The cameras captured Joy sitting still, hands clasped, staring at the table for a long beat. For perhaps the first time in her television career, she had no comeback. No witty retort. No sharp pivot. Just silence. And in that silence, something powerful happened. The audience began to clap. It started slowly, hesitant, then grew stronger. Not wild applause. Not celebratory cheering. Respectful. Sustained. Reba didn't bask in it. She didn't smile triumphantly. She simply sat there, composed, letting the moment pass. Joy remained motionless, absorbing it. The applause faded gradually. Reba spoke one last time. We don't have to agree on everything, she said softly. But if we can't talk without assuming the worst about each other, then we've already lost something bigger than politics. She paused. Music crosses lines. It reaches people where speeches can't. That's why I'm here. Because connection matters more than condemnation. The studio felt different now. Lighter. Not because someone had won, but because something honest had been said. Joy finally lifted her gaze. I appreciate your perspective, she managed quietly. It wasn't a full concession. But it was something. Reba gave a small, gracious nod. The floor manager's voice cut through softly from off-camera. And we're clear. The red light above the camera switched off. But no one moved immediately. Crew members hesitated, unsure whether to rush in or let the silence dissolve naturally. The audience began to rise slowly, still murmuring, processing what they'd just witnessed. Joy exhaled deeply, rubbing her temples. Reba stood calmly, smoothing her blazer. There was no gloating. No dramatic exit. Just quiet dignity. As she stepped away from the table, a few audience members reached out subtly, nodding, offering silent acknowledgement. In the control room, producers stared at monitors, fully aware they had just captured a moment that would ripple far beyond this studio. Because this wasn't just a heated interview. It was a reminder. That strength doesn't always shout. That composure can dismantle confrontation more effectively than fury. And that underestimating someone who has spent decades earning respect, can be a costly miscalculation. Later that day, clips would circulate. Debates would erupt. Comment sections would explode with divided opinions. But inside that studio, in that exact moment, one thing was undeniable. The dynamic had flipped. And it flipped not with anger. But with steadiness. With clarity. With refusal to be cornered. That was the real turning point. Not humiliation. Not victory. Just a woman refusing to be reduced to a stereotype. And in doing so, forcing everyone watching, host included, to reconsider their own. If this moment made you think. If it challenged your perspective. If it reminded you that real conversations require courage from both sides. Then make sure you like this video, drop your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe for more deep dives into the moments that redefine live television. Because sometimes, the most explosive clashes aren't the loudest ones. They're the ones where silence says everything.